It's not a doll. It's an action figure. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below, and it's going to give you a pretty good sense of what we do here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. In short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from the subgenre to explore. But this is the Doctorate Level series. This is where we revisit a subgenre we've already talked about. We've already looked at 3 movies from it, and we kind of recap that, and then we pick a new 4th Doctorate Level selection, something that is usually a little bit more obscure or less mainstream, a little deeper cut, if you will, maybe something that's a little bit more cult classic-y, and then we kind of get into that a little bit so we can kind of revisit the entire subgenre. And the subgenre that we're revisiting today is dolls, creepy killer dolls. And I really like these kind of movies. I talked about it in the previous video that I'm a fan of these since childhood, really, because there's something about dolls that is innately scary. Like, they just have a creep factor to them that's just kind of innate. It's just kind of there. And it's kind of hard to explain why, but I was, at least in my own personal experience, able to trace it back to like the Poltergeist clown and Talkie Tina from the Twilight Zone. Those things scared me as a child, and I resonate to this day. So these tend to be movies that I find to be pretty creepy, pretty enjoyable, pretty fun. And we talked about that quite a bit in the previous video, which if you haven't seen, you can check it out. There's a link to that in the description below as well. But it's a fun subgenre, and it's one that I'm eager to revisit because I've got a couple that I think are more obscure and are definitely something that is maybe more specific to me. I don't know. We'll find out. But before we get into all of the new stuff, I want to go ahead and just do a quick recap for those of you that missed it of what we talked about in the previous video. So let's do that recap right now. The first doll horror movie that we looked at was Annabelle. And Annabelle is, of course, a spin-off from the very popular Conjuring franchise. And while I'm not a super huge fan of this movie, I did like the sequels a little bit more, and I talked about that. But this movie is beloved. This franchise is beloved by people. They find the doll to be very creepy, very scary, and it is a creepy design. The design of the doll is creepy. We talked about how it's maybe a little too creepy. It's like a little on the nose how creepy this doll is. Like, I don't know why any child would want this doll. And it's not really accurate to the supposedly real Annabelle doll if you look that up. But it is a very popular movie, and it's kind of easy to see why. It starts out with a really good premise that, unfortunately for me at least, fizzles out a little bit as the movie goes on, and it becomes more about just showing this creepy doll that honestly kind of just sits there a lot and doesn't do much in the entire movie. So that was a little bit of a disappointment to me, but a lot of people really found it, the atmosphere to be creepy, the doll to be creepy, and the concept again was a pretty good concept that carried out and translated better into the sequel. So definitely want to check out because of the popularity alone, but it's actually a decent start to a franchise that winds up getting better as it goes along. The next doll movie that we talked about was Child's Play, and I shared my very deep love for Chucky as a character and the series as a whole. I think it's a really strong series that started out kind of like a serious, straightforward take on killer dolls, and then got more fun and kind of campy and leaned into the silliness of it as it went on to its benefit. I talked a lot about Brad Dourif, who does the voice of Chucky, and how much he brings to the character in terms of personality and making him funny and interesting, kind of like Freddy Krueger. And I talked a little bit about how even in the first movie, the doll effects look good. He is a pretty convincing, creepy looking doll. He is a slasher icon, and I talked about that a little bit. He is so well known in the horror universe as a iconic monster or killer, and I liked that the quality of the series got like sillier and campier, but also more fun and more interesting, and they really built out the mythology of it pretty darn well. And I just really enjoyed Chucky. I'm a big fan, and I think that everybody should see the first one, if not all of them. Maybe skip that remake. I did talk about that a little bit, and I actually liked it, but it's not Chucky, and we talked about that in the video. And the final doll horror movie we talked about was May. And May was, by my own admission, a somewhat unique and different doll movie. It's not your standard killer doll movie, and I didn't really want to spoil why that was, and I still don't. I talked about Lucky McKee, the director, he's a horror director that I like quite a bit, and this is maybe his best movie. I talked about the really stellar cast starring Angela Bettis as the main character, who is just bringing a lot of pathos and heart to the movie, and a lot of creep factor as well. And I talked a little bit about the supporting cast, Jeremy Sisto, Anna Faris, and what they bring to the movie. It really is a solid performance from the cast, and it really leads into this whole dark and sad movie that has a lot of heart, that gets really creepy and weird in a really good way. And with the way the doll factors into all this is different than what you would normally expect it to be. And I'll just leave it at that, because this is a movie you should experience for yourself. So that's going to do it for our recap of the doll horror movies we talked about in the previous video. Now let's get into our doctorate level selection. Our doctorate level selection for the doll subgenre is Magic. Magic came out in 1978 and was directed by Richard Attenborough, legendary director and actor. He is very well known, very famous. I believe he won an Oscar. He's done a lot of great films, and this is one that probably doesn't get talked about as much compared to some of his more noteworthy mainstream movies. This is one that kind of flies under the radar a little bit, but horror fans seem to be dialed in on this one. I got a lot of people talking about where's Magic, where's Magic. So here we are, we're getting into it, and honestly, it's a little overdue, to be fair. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a struggling magician who is trying to get his act to work better or be more popular, and he incorporates a ventriloquist dummy into his act, and that does make his act much better, much more popular, but he seems to be having some sort of emotional or mental issues with it, and he winds up kind of running away. And while his agent is looking for him to try to help him get on TV and be successful and face his successful burgeoning career, he goes back to an old high school love and winds up trying to reconnect, but that causes additional problems that the dummy might not be too okay with. And we're going to go ahead and stop there so as to not spoil the movie too much for you. But honestly, when we talk about this a little bit, we're going to be spoiling something about the movie that maybe is a misconception of people when they see what it's about or see the poster or see anything like that, which is it's not exactly a straightforward killer doll movie. It really is focusing more on like the mental health of our protagonist, who's played by Anthony Hopkins. Hopkins is the magician who starts incorporating this ventriloquist dummy, and it's like that dummy represents his id, and that's not me coming up with that. I got that from like Wikipedia or something like that, but it really is like the dummy can speak for him and say the things that he couldn't say or wouldn't say. But it's almost like a multiple personality disorder, like a DID type thing, except it's not. It's kind of being manifested through this dummy, this ventriloquist dummy. But it's a really killer performance by Hopkins. He's doing both his own performance as the magician, and he's also doing the voice of the dummy. And it's a really great performance, young Hopkins. And that's really one of the biggest strengths of this movie is the cast. Because you've got Hopkins as the magician, and you've got Burgess Meredith as his agent. And Burgess Meredith is just really coming out great, doing this agent that is kind of a caricature of like a real life agent that he based on that I'm not familiar with, but I did research for this video and saw that. But he's also, while he's being a caricature, he's also bringing a kind of like a gravitas or a reality or humanizing of him into the role, making him feel more well-rounded, more realistic, and it's pretty darn great. And then you got Ann-Margret as the love interest, and she is wonderful because Ann-Margret is beautiful, and she's, this is, a little later. She's not, in her Elvis days necessarily at this point, but she is beautiful, and she is so down to earth and charming in this movie that you understand the appeal of it, and she is like a breath of fresh air because she kind of is, she's like us. She's a little bit in the dark on this, but she still understands the weirdness of the situation, and she is a kind of an anchor character. She's really doing great work in this. Everybody is really bringing this home, which is important because it's a little bit of a ludicrous premise, right? This guy who's kind of acting out through his ventriloquist dummy could be silly, and they don't play it that way. They play it straight, and it works. And it kind of shouldn't work. It still manages to be fun, even though it's a serious take on this subject matter, and it's a serious take on this mental health condition idea. It's really still pretty fun, and part of that's because the doll, the dummy, is creepy. they've decided to make it not so much an evil killer doll as it is like a mentally disturbed individual who happens to have this puppet. And that is good. It works. It grounds the movie, and the acting helps ground that. But they still made a dummy that's pretty creepy. Now, again, dolls are inherently creepy, right? I said that. But, ventriloquist dummies in particular are inherently creepy. And this one works really well. And as evil things start to happen, kills start to happen, things like that, you see the doll doing it. And it's fun because you still have the doll doing stuff, and I don't want to get into it too much. I don't want to spoil the movie too much, but like you still get the doll doing things that's kind of funny. Like the kills are fun. They're kind of, you have to strain credulity a little bit, and there's a little bit to it, but there's still a lot of fun, and the movie still winds up working really really well, and it balances that kind of serious rationale for what's happening versus killer doll, and it balances those two things really, really well. Now, I'll admit the pacing could be a little bit tighter. This is a movie from the 70s. It's a little bit slow paced, but I liked that it let the movie breathe a little bit. The characters have some time to develop. The relationships in the movie have time to develop and bear fruit. We get a good taste of what Hopkins and Burgess Meredith's relationship is like. We get a little bit of a flavor of why Hopkins and Ann-Margret are attracted to each other. In a lesser movie, we might not really get an opportunity to see those things develop because we'd be too busy getting back to the killer doll wreaking havoc. And that might be a complaint for some people, is that the killer doll doesn't wreak enough havoc, or doesn't wreak havoc frequently enough throughout the movie. But I liked the drama of it. I liked seeing Hopkins give a really great performance as this mentally disturbed individual who's trying very hard to keep his sanity and have things go right. And this dummy that is really kind of pushing him in another direction. It really worked for me, again, in large part because Anthony Hopkins is a great actor, but also because they still managed to weave in some pretty fun kills in here. Just admittedly not enough. Like if you're looking for the paint the movie red with blood, you might be a little disappointed in this. But if you're looking for a pretty fun kind of psychological terror and a really interesting exploration, not a very nuanced or sensitive exploration of mental health, I'll admit that, but it's a really interesting, fun one to balance, killer doll with, mental issues. That worked for me really well. That's the strength of the movie, again, because the acting makes it work. And it's fun because this movie is really well liked critically. It got a really good marks, and it has maintained critical praise, but it never really went mainstream. It wasn't a big hit when it came out, and it's never really, you don't hear a lot of people talking about it outside of the horror community. The horror fans who like killer doll movies, things like that, they'll often bring this one up, and with good reason, because it is a very good movie, but it kind of feels like it's a little bit of an underrated gem. It's a little bit of a forgotten movie. Again, with a cast like this, you would think that it would be remembered a little bit more, like, prominently, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. You'll still see it maybe on some best of lists or something like that. It comes up, but everybody knows Chucky. Everybody knows Child's Play. Even if you don't like horror movies, you know who Chucky is, but you don't know Magic, right? You haven't heard about it unless you're a horror fan. Even if you're a horror fan, you might not have heard about this one because it does go under the radar quite a bit. But there's a reason why the critics liked it so much. There's a reason why it's got this cult love. The people who know, because it is good. Like I said, it may be a little slow burn for some people. Maybe could be paced a little bit tighter. Maybe get a little bit more kill action in there. But it's a good movie. It's a lot of fun. I like this movie quite a bit, in large part because of the creepy dummy. But as I've gotten older, because of the really fantastic performances. This is a movie that's very much worth your time. If you haven't seen it, check it out and let me know what you think of it. But I know a few of you have. So shout out in the comments, like, what is it that you like about this movie? Because I have yet to find somebody who didn't like this movie. But if you didn't, share that in the comments as well. We'll be nice to you. But let's talk about Magic in the comments because it deserves to be talked about a little bit more. Okay, so that was our doctorate level selection for doll horror movies. But as usual, I've got an extra credit movie for you. And this one's going to be an interesting one. But let's just go ahead and dig into it. Our extra credit selection for today is Black Devil Doll. Black Devil Doll came out in 2007 and was directed by Jonathan Lewis. And I am a little reluctant to pick this one because it's so out there and lesser known and weird. and iffy for a number of reasons. We're going to get into all of that, but it's a movie that I tend to really enjoy, and I think I'm the only one besides maybe the people who made it who like it. But let's just get into it, and you'll see why I'm so trepidatious about all of this. If you haven't seen it before, and you probably haven't. The movie is about a killer, a rapist who has been convicted and is now going to be executed on death row. And he, before he gets executed, manages to possess a puppet, like a ventriloquist dummy style puppet that is living with some woman. And he becomes this jive talking puppet who is interested in sex and drugs and violence. And he decides to manipulate this woman into bringing her friends over so that he can have his way with them and murder them, and hijinks abound, and it's all fairly terrible. But I'm going to stop to not spoil it, even though it's dumb and there's really no reason not to spoil it. But that's what I kind of want to go with, is this movie's dumb. It's bad. It's terrible. I'm not really actually recommending it exactly. I kind of wanted to talk about it because like nobody but me seems to talk about this, and it's important. Don't confuse this with Black Devil Doll from Hell, which is the 1970s exploitation movie. It's a similar name and honestly similar spirit, to be honest with you. But that movie is a little bit more noteworthy and arguably better than this one, even though it's not the greatest of movies either, but it's got a little bit more cachet, a little bit more of a reputation. This one does not really have that much of a reputation, except that if you've seen it, you won't ever forget it. The movie is very explicit and offensive and gross. It's gleefully offensive and gross. It's reveling in its grossness and its crassness, and arguably it's blaxploitation. It's blaxploitation in the broadest sense of the word, but it doesn't really have the same feel as like the blaxploitation movies of the 70s and stuff like that, and even the more modern blaxploitation. It feels a little bit off from that, and I think it's because of the explicit nature of it. It's not pornographic, but it feels really porny. There's a lot of scantily clad women or naked women. Actually, there's a tremendous amount of nudity in the movie, and there's a lot of sex and sexually charged things going on in there. And it's really, I'd say it's more explicit than Meet the Feebles. If you know Meet the Feebles, or if you saw the video that we did on Meet the Feebles, we talked about how it was very explicit sexually. This movie's probably more so than that, and it's a lot of like scatological and other bodily fluids and stuff like that. And there's murder and there's sexual assault and it's a lot of stuff, and it's all played for laughs. And that's the thing, is like it's arguably it's trying too hard to be funny, but it actually, for me at least, does manage to be funny. Like it does get tedious at some points. It does at some points drag a little bit. It's not a very long movie, so the fact that it drags as a short movie is not great. And the acting is awful. In fact, everything about the movie is pretty much awful, except maybe the puppet. The puppet itself is pretty great. He looks good. He's funny. He when he's doing stuff, it looks hilarious because they've done a pretty good job of the effects with the puppet. But it's just like, it just still looks weird moving because it's a puppet, right? But and then, he's talking jive and he's saying all these things and he's funny. Like, it's funny to me. Like, I guess a guilty pleasure. Like, the movie is, it makes me laugh. I really enjoy this movie. I've seen it a couple times and it's hilarious. And I might be the only one who has this kind of strange affection for it. That's why I wanted to talk about it, because I do really like this movie, even though it's horrible. I tried to show this once to my friends at like a movie get together party. We all get together to watch a movie, and I picked the movie and I picked this, and it was the last time that I was allowed to pick a movie. They all hated it. We didn't even get to finish it. It got too crass for people. It got too stupid for people. They were uncomfortable with the taboo subject matter. And it is. It's quite taboo. Like I said, it's taboo, but it's all done so ridiculously that it's hard to get offended by it because it's just so stupid. It is stupid. Like I said, the acting is horrible. The script is stupid. It doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense. It doesn't really go anywhere. Not much happens. It all pretty much takes place in a house. It's very low budget, but it still works for me. It's still funny to me. Like seeing this puppet have sex, seeing this puppet murder people, seeing him talk trash and say really offensive things. It just, I don't know. It just works for me. And I'm not recommending it to any of you. I'm not telling any of you to watch it. It's a bad movie. I'm not really warning you away from it. I'm just kind of like letting you know what it is and that it exists and what to expect. Because again, nobody's talking about this. This doesn't really have a whole lot of notoriety. It doesn't have, it's on here solely because I like it. And I'm just gonna like own up to that, because every time I think of killer doll movies, I think about this movie and I always bring it up, and nobody else seems to have seen it unless I made them see it and they didn't finish it. So that's me talking about this one. But like, it's like I said, it's very explicit, it's very offensive, it's very gross, and it's pretty funny. It's not amazingly funny, but it's pretty funny. At least it hits me in the right funny bone, I guess. So that's me kind of just sharing a little bit of insight into my wacky sense of humor here. But I'm again, I'm kind of like just letting you guys know, don't bother, right? But if you do bother, if you happen to have seen it, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd be surprised if anybody else has any kind of affection for this movie. But if you do, let me know. Like, it'd be nice to know that I'm not the only one. It's probably just me and Jonathan Lewis who like this movie. Like, even the actors don't seem to have done much other stuff. I think they're just people that were willing to get naked on camera more than they were like there for their acting ability. But it really is not a great movie, so I don't expect any of you to love it or anything like that. But if you do, let me know so we can kind of bond over it. So that's going to do it for our exploration into our re-exploration into doll horror movies. These movies that I picked are, like I said, not necessarily in the mainstream by any stretch of the imagination, but you should definitely check out Magic, and you should maybe probably skip Black Devil Doll. But I want to know what you guys think of these movies if you've seen them, and I want to know what other doll movies you think maybe it would be interesting to me. Leave comments down below so I can get some suggestions of other things to watch. But right now, what I want to watch is a horror trivia pursuit card. Well, not just watch it, but I'm actually going to read it because, I want to try to answer this question live on camera without cutting so that you can tell I don't cheat. And since we're talking about killer dolls, let's go with the monster category on the card. And here's the question. The characters in 2007's The Mist hole up in which of the following? Home, grocery store, office building, or mall? If you've seen The Mist, or even if you just kind of know about it, I suspect that this is going to be a relatively easy one to answer. I know the answer to this question, and I think everybody, like I said, if you know anything about The Mist, you probably know the answer to this question. I think this question is, to me, easy enough that it probably didn't even need the multiple choice. That's how easy I think it is. But it gives you multiple choice, which gives you 4 choices. That should make it a lot easier to guess if you don't know The Mist. And if you don't know The Mist, I would say check it out. It's a pretty solid, pretty good Stephen King movie. We talked about it on the channel here. I do think that the CGI effects, even at the time, didn't look great, and they really haven't aged super great now. But other than that, like, I think the drama between all the characters who are holed up in the location that is on this card is a compelling one. I think it works rather well. And of course, when people talk about The Mist, it's the ending. It's the amazing ending that really resonates for everybody, and is what makes it so memorable and noteworthy. And I will not spoil that ending, obviously. Go check out The Mist if you haven't seen it before, and try to get avoid spoilers for the movie in general, but especially for the ending, because it really, really works. It doesn't end the way that the story ends. So if you've read the Stephen King story, it doesn't end the same way. So it's definitely worth a watch for sure. But if you, like I said, if you do know anything about it, you probably know about, what the answer is to this question. I'm not going to prattle on too long for this because, I think it's a fairly easy one. So lock in your answers, lock in your guess. If you haven't seen The Mist and you don't know, lock in your guess. You got 1 in 4 chance here. But I'm going to go ahead and make my guess. I guess it's the right answer. I know what it is. So lock it in. Okay. My answer is, of course, grocery store. They're at the grocery store when the mist rolls in, and all the creatures in the mist kind of prevent them from being able to get back to their cars, and they're stuck in the grocery store. And then they wind up having all the factions that break out to each other, and then all the internal tension of being stuck in this grocery store. That is my answer. Grocery store. Let's just check the card to make sure. And it is grocery store. So yeah, to me that one was fairly easy. I'm not super impressed with myself or anything like that about that one, but it is a great movie, a really good movie. I don't know if great is the right answer, but really, really good movie. Definitely worth your time. Let me know if you've seen The Mist. Let me know if you've seen Magic, and let me especially know if you've seen Black Devil Doll. But that's going to do it for this week. Thanks for hanging out to the end. I appreciate you guys, and until next week, let's just say